Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. As they said, I am an economist, so now for something completely different. So I'm an innovation economist. That is a degree you cannot get from anywhere. So I consistently study public-private partnerships around emerging technologies, scientific research. It's a lot of things around standards, regulations, research infrastructure, that sort of thing. So this includes cybersecurity topics. So this project that I'm presenting is on the cost of insecure software. And as you can see, I am not alone. We work in really wonderful, large, interdisciplinary teams. So this is a big multi-person initiative that I am leading at RTI. So a little bit about RTI. We're a nonprofit research institute. We work on improving the human condition, like every software company, right? We all want to make the world a better place. So we do a lot of research on federal and state and local initiatives around many topics, and I focus on science and innovation. So this specific question we're looking at, what's the problem? So everybody here knows the problem. Current software manufacturing processes don't sufficiently protect against cyber incidents. Software manufacturers have limited liability when an incident occurs. So this means that software customers and third parties are bearing the brunt of most of the costs when incidents happen. So the question for our study is basically, how big are these costs? If you want to be fancy about it, we are looking at the magnitude of the negative externalities caused by insecure software across the US economy. So by negative externalities, we mean these uncompensated costs that are occurring to software customers and third parties. A negative externality means one person does something, another party ends up bearing the costs of that action. That's all that is. And then by the events caused by insecure software, we're both talking about malicious incidents, but also unintended consequences that are just enabled by having insecure software. So why do we care? Preaching to the choir. But market failures like this can often require some form of government intervention to address them. This can take a lot of forms. It can be positive incentives, it can be regulations, it can be a lot of different things. To know whether or not you need to do a government intervention, you first have to figure out, is this problem big enough to address? And then also understanding how large the problem is gives you kind of a price threshold for how much you want to spend on trying to fix the problem, right? You don't want to spend more on fixing something than it is costing society. That doesn't make sense. And then the other thing is to kind of get some demand push here, right? Encourage the public to demand more secure software. People who are informed about the situation have more power in a market. Right now, it seems like customers don't even really necessarily know that they should be asking that the software they receive be secure, right? So getting a large sense of how much are we at the economy level paying when we receive software that does not come to us in the way that we need it to. What do those costs look like as a society? Oh, maybe we should actually be doing something different, right? So what are these categories of costs? So there's a lot of different cost breakouts. We tried to simplify this down to these three categories. So you have your cyber risk management costs. These are incurred by both software customers and third parties. Doesn't matter if you're a business or an individual. So this is any time that you are trying to attempt to manage cyber risk induced by insecure software. On the back end, when an incident does occur, that's where we split this out between software customers and third parties. The reason we do this is data-driven, right? We have some reporting on how much it costs software customers when an incident occurs because of some mandatory reporting requirements, some SEC reports. There's data out there. It's not comprehensive, but we have some indication of this is how much it costs software customers when an incident occurs. The really big unknown is what happens to people when your flight gets canceled because the software broke, right? So, and those costs can be really huge. They're really complicated to estimate. This is the primary job of economists, so we are doing this. we basically decided to split out into what can we inarguably measure based off of market data and common reports that are available, and what can we estimate using some more creative economic methods. So we've split these two things up. So today I'm primarily going to tell you about the things that are so concrete they're real hard to argue with. So a big part of this is, what are we attributing to insecure software? A lot of people have already talked about the different types of threats and insecurities that we can come up against. We chose to focus on initial access vectors, again, because that's where the majority of the data are, right? Root cause analysis would be great. There aren't really data on root causes of incidents at the level that we would need it. There's pretty solid evidence on the proportion of incidents that are occurring with different initial access vectors. And then what of that are we attributing to insecure software? Obviously, software vulnerabilities, but then importantly, getting at the secure by default realm, we kind of lump together these credential-related access issues. We would love feedback on this, right? This is one of our key assumptions in terms of what we're considering in our costs. So if any of this feels wonky to the cybersecurity world, we would love your feedback. So we are looking at some annual reports from cybersecurity vendors. The ones we landed on were Verizon, Sophos, and Unit 42. We used vendors that had at least 2 years worth of data, that were reporting fairly consistently on initial access vectors, because even those reports kind of break out initial access vectors in different ways in each one, but consistently enough that we could bin them, and having sample size information. So Mandiant has the M-Trends reports. Those are really great. There's no sample size information in there, so we couldn't include it because we have to weight the results by the sample size. There's a publication by Seymour and Woods that came out this year that focuses on communications around cyber threats. This binned things differently than initial access vectors. The sample is focused exclusively on small businesses outside of the US, and it's communications, not actual incidents. There were enough reasons why it wasn't really comparable to what we're looking at that we just couldn't fit it in. It's in our appendix if anybody really wants to see it. So what does these 3 vendor reports, it's 6 reports from 3 vendors, tell us? So we land on basically about 68% of incidents being attributable either to direct software vulnerabilities or credential-related access. And you'll notice one of the main arguments of the Seymour and Woods paper is that vulnerabilities are not a huge part of the overall vulnerability network, right? Direct software vulnerabilities aren't necessarily what we should be focusing on. We actually kind of see that in the data overall, right? You do have a lot coming from direct software vulnerabilities, but you have more coming from any sort of credential-related access. And down here I have what we're including: credential abuse, phishing, compromised credentials, phishing. Everybody reports it a little bit differently. Brute force, things like that. This is still excluding anything else where some form of secure design or default configurations could address those access vectors as well. This is kind of a low bar. So we end up with 63 to 80% of incidents that we're attributing in some way to either insecure software by design or default. Okay, cost data. Where are they? Who do they cover? So key components of these risk management costs are cybersecurity employee time, paying to have cybersecurity employee workers do safeguards and response. Here we're focusing on the safeguards part, not the response. These come from BLS, and CyberSeek is actually a tool that is supported by NIST, and it gets at cybersecurity employment by looking at job descriptions. If you look at US labor data at all, NAICS codes don't capture you all at all. Right? Like cybersecurity employees work everywhere for everyone in every industry. It's really, really hard to classify the cybersecurity workforce. So supported by NIST, CyberSeek generated basically based off of job descriptions, like looking at job postings and job descriptions to try and figure out where are cybersecurity workers and how many of them are there. Cybersecurity products and services, this is essentially like how much money is being spent on cybersecurity vendors of some sort. It's just revenue data. It's from industry reports. We chose CISA. There's other ones available. They all kind of tell you the same thing. And then you do spend some money on cybersecurity insurance above and beyond your claims. This is small, but we included it. And then current theoretic best in class for publicly reported cyber incidents is from Scientia using Xywave data. It was Advisen, rebranded to Xywave this year. So we use that for these post-incident costs. And then all these underreported things going to third parties is a focus of a secondary paper. I have a little preview for you at the end. But this involved us doing some creative research. Okay, so what do the hard data that we have available tell us? The largest cost is actually this outside cybersecurity employee time. So this looks like a simple number. This was the most involved for us to model. So this involved us figuring out annual compensation of the cybersecurity workforce outside of those who are being employed by this cybersecurity products and services industry, right? Obviously, a huge part of the cybersecurity workforce is working for the cybersecurity products and services industry, but a much larger portion is working for everyone else. So we had to try and figure out, we used revenue data versus GDP, total annual labor, to figure out how many people we thought were working outside of those people. So this is $50 billion a year of people just paying for cybersecurity employees outside of the cybersecurity products and services that they purchase, right? $27 billion that people are spending on cybersecurity products and services. The reason we have these 50% here is because, again, this is actually one of our biggest stats that we would love if anyone has a different number or multiple numbers for us to draw on. But we found that a survey saying that 50% of cybersecurity budgets are on detection and protection as opposed to response. We'd love more on that. So this is only half of the total of what's being spent in these industries and on these people. The publicly reported cyber incidents from Scientia, when you just look at the incident cost in 2024 times the incidents in 2024, you end up at another 24 billion, and that's increasing every year, right? So this is the 2024 value, not the average value over the last 15 years, because it is consistently increasing. So that number is only going up. And then, like I said, cybersecurity insurance, this is small. Basically, we looked at what's the cost of insurance beyond what gets compensated to you in claims, because that's the cost of having insurance. And that's all prevention, right? That's the money you pay to have insurance, beyond what you're going to get back for the insurance. So smaller at only $3 billion a year. So this totals to over $100 billion a year. And this is just, so everything, you have the 50% here, you have the totals there. All of this is further reduced by the 68% that we're attributing to insecure software with the ranges around that. So this 100 billion is what we're attributing to insecure software only in the realms of prevention, separate from response, so that we're not double counting. This is the easy, straightforward part, right? So what does all this tell us? Cyber incidents are really expensive. It's costing the US economy a ton of money. Trying to protect against cyber incidents is even more expensive. It's over 3 times as expensive. And customers and third parties are paying this money. So as we're hearing, one of the main arguments you hear against the leftward shift is, well, it'll make the software more expensive. We're already paying a lot of money because the software is not secure. So the idea of the software becoming maybe more expensive because it's secure, you're theoretically just shifting those costs. And hopefully they'd be lower, right? And again, this doesn't even include what happens to the average American when stuff goes wrong, right? This is just the stuff that's getting reported because it's being compensated in liability, and so much of these disruptions result in things that are never compensated for. Oh, we're doing great. Okay, so here's the preview. Like I said, the other stuff was the easy part. Trying to figure out what happens to the average human being when things get disrupted is really messy because it's not reported consistently, right? So we went through a web scraping process. We focused on priority sectors that were either critical infrastructure or in this category of not having resources to respond to cyber incidents. So we have health, education, finance, utilities, energy, transportation, and agriculture. And agriculture is actually one that came up a lot that we don't think about very much. It's not often a target, but it's our food. And there's some really interesting cases that have occurred in agriculture. And it's very underreported because it's not currently under any mandatory reporting requirements. So we'll talk about that. So basically, we identified some priority industries. We did all this initial research on incidents and where are the best reports. We developed keywords, and then we went to the news, and we found stories that we could find about incidents that occurred. And we're not using data points from the news, but this was to help us find, what happened, what were the disruptions, what were the types of things that happened to people when things went wrong. And also web reviews of industry reports, government reports, all of that. So we ended up with about 86 reports that we're using to kind of form this database of what are we looking at. From this, we identified some case studies across a few key topics. So we have food security. So this is agriculture, food manufacturing, and commercial transportation. When any of these things gets impacted, our food security gets impacted. So specific case studies that we're looking at are cooperative ransomware attacks that disrupted agriculture during harvest. JBS is actually a really interesting one. It was a meat manufacturing production facility, and they had a cyber attack that halted meat production, and there was between $50 and $100 million worth of consumer surplus lost from meat prices going up from that one incident, right? Commercial transportation, really similar. Cold storage, transportation went down because of a cyber incident. That meant that dairy couldn't get shipped. That meant that dairy prices went up. You saw similar impacts to people. Time and financial losses to human beings. So here we categorize personal travel, energy, utility services disruptions, and shareholder returns. So we're gonna have to look real close at shareholder returns because this is huge. There's a lot of existing reports out there that estimate that it's like 10 to 100 times the size of the losses that are directly reported by companies, right? And that's a lot of public people. Your 401k goes down because cyber incidents hit a bunch of the stocks that make up part of your portfolio, right? So we're gonna scrutinize that one a lot because it's tens of billions big right now. So we're gonna scrutinize that a lot. But yeah, Colonial Pipeline, people talked about this. We looked at 10 cyber attacks on air, rail, or car transit. A lot of times you get compensated, like maybe a hotel, maybe some meals. If you have to get where you're going and you have to pay for an alternate airline and you spent $3,000 on a ticket, the airline doesn't cover that, right? People get affected in real ways. And then the last thing are these physical and emotional costs. People mentioned healthcare outages. There's a lot of studies that show that there's real disruptions to patient care when this happens, sometimes extended for months because of inability to use online systems and then flooding into neighboring healthcare facilities, right? One healthcare facility can't take patients. They all get shipped to another hospital. That hospital gets overburdened. Everybody's patient care gets decreased. And then when your identity gets stolen, it sucks, right? So you go through a lot when you have to deal with this, and so you can estimate that as well. So this is all something that we are currently building these case studies on and scrutinizing to build up more costs. They're also really big, so these costs are really expensive. That's all I have for you. A huge thank you to our sponsor. We have, the work is funded by CISA, and we have been working with the Office of the Chief Economist and the Cybersecurity Division there. So thank you, and thank you all. And I would love some questions and comments.
Thank you. I'm Jason Choi. I work for the Department of Defense. Wondering if your presentation included any consideration for the loss in like a federal government space?
Yeah, so disruptions to public services. Yeah, so that was one of the priority industries that we cover. So in this, we actually have, for each priority industry, public sector was in there, apologies. We go through basically like, the conglomerated anecdotal evidence of what we found. Here's cases that we saw in these areas. Here's some news reports that we found on how people were impacted. We do that for every priority industry. The main report that I presented on is a cute 50 pages, including references. This one's gonna be like 150 pages. So we go through for every industry at that level. And then what was selected for case studies was largely based off of what we could analyze. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tim Ogden. Thank you for this presentation. It was really, really good and interesting. In this specific slide, can you refer to the insecure software impact versus other components of these cybersecurity attacks? Not all of them are explicitly insecure software, are they?
So a lot of them are ransomware attacks. So it depends on how you choose to couch that. We can and will apply that same, what percentage threshold are we attributing to this? We should actually be able to make sure that we know the initial access vectors for each of these incidents. Those should be reported. So I think in each case, if there's specific ones that you're thinking of where you're like, I wouldn't call that insecure software, that would be good to know.
No, but I guess following up on the DoD guy's question is reputational risk. I think besides just disruption of citizen services, there's a lot of the cybersecurity investment is made for, unfortunately, reputational risk management in DoD sometimes, and that seems not to be accounted for here.
So are you saying a proportion of spending on what would be couched as protection, but it's really like reputational rather than protection? Is that what you mean?
Yes. Yeah, I guess how would you account for that? And like you said, perhaps there's some companies that suffer some market cap disruption.
Oh yeah.
When so to the cybersecurity product company like a CrowdStrike a year ago.
Right.
But its stock is much higher today.
Right. Yeah, so
there's a temporary reputational risk or valuation reduction maybe to the Department of the Navy or whomever is affected, but long term, how do you account for the return of reputation?
Yeah, so for the most part, we're addressing reputational damage in a qualitative sense. Like we talk about it in our cost typology, mostly from a qualitative standpoint. What you're saying is exactly why the loss market capitalization needs to be like really heavily scrutinized before we report on it. Reports have found, for example, that you'll have a hit for a few months, maybe it recuperates. You still have loss to anyone selling in those few months, right? So, but you have to make sure that you're calculating what was the loss during that window and how do you isolate who lost money versus who went on to buy low and sell high and gain money. So I also want to make sure that we're only looking at public shareholders, not corporate shareholders, right? So it's like who is truly a third party in this case. So we have a lot to do to make sure that we're looking at the isolated effect of the reputational damage while accounting for the fact that it does bounce back up after.
Good afternoon. Is there a law specific across all industries that requires reporting to any central organization?
No, so
So
there's,
it's-
yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's still voluntary.
Correct. Well, so, okay, so health has requirements, finance has requirements, public institutions have requirements. CISA is not published, right? So CISA would be the most overarching. That is still in draft form.
Okay, and without that centralized source, I, as a consumer, could not go and see if I'm making a choice about where to put my business.
Oh, sorry, one other thing is any publicly traded company in any industry, but not all companies are publicly traded.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Kerry Zajac here. Great presentation. I really enjoyed it. Have you tried, you wanted cybersecurity feedback, like mapping to MITRE attack models for initial access vectors? That way you have like your brute force, your phishing, your 0-day, things like that.
Yeah, so I thought about it, right? So we started with MITRE. I'm not sure. That was our initial idea, right? That we'd get like some internal help to map from MITRE to initial access to really be able to come up with this great matrix of this is what's in secure software. We could not find any cybersecurity representatives who felt good about doing that with confidence. The few initial access vectors that we are focusing on have so far passed the sniff test of like, well, yeah, for sure it's those, and probably more. So we think we're relying on a lower bound by focusing only on these initial access vectors. We think if we did that crosswalk, we would end up with a higher percentage.
100% agreed. I was thinking of like Heartbleed, if you remember that, or Spectre Meltdown, where there was, well, some stuff associated with it. But, you know, the initial access vector of phishing or 0-day doesn't super count, but, you know, Heartbleed was a big problem back in the day. Thank you.
Thanks.
One more right here. Hi. You were talking early on about the amount spent on cybersecurity professionals and products, and if we shift that earlier, it's cheaper. Do you have any examples of companies that have done that, and what percentage they were able to shift earlier? Because you're never going to get rid of the cyber professionals altogether.
Right.
And it kind of, I'm sure there's some hesitancy after something happens to get rid of the people that might have caught it in favor of shifting stuff earlier. So like what do you think really could be moved earlier in the process?
Yeah, so we were very intentionally scoped to look at the cost of not, and not what is the cost of, right? What's the cost of doing shift left secure by design, secure by default? So we are very focused on just looking at what are the current costs of not doing that. I fully agree. I think there's this marginal effect that will happen because if you make one piece of software more secure, it's not like my company can get rid of all of its IT professionals and security infrastructure, right? So you kind of need a standard of the software we provide is going to be secure writ large to start really decreasing that pool of customer protection response costs. We are not in the scope of our report looking at what these different levers might be to get us to that world. I would be very interested to hear from you all on that throughout the conference.
Yeah, I think that's important to show people the vision instead of just the doom and gloom of costs.
Yeah. A lot of my analyses are cost-benefit analyses where you're comparing the two together. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is something that you could actually even manage to quantify, but I'm not a cybersecurity professional, but a good portion of my work goes towards that.
Yeah.
Have you put any thought into how you can account for that?
If it's in your job description, you're in CyberSeek, right? So CyberSeek is basing it off of your job description. So if it's in your lists of roles and responsibilities and skills and tools and specializations, you're in that pool. That's what's good about the CyberSeek pool. There might still be a few corner cases that are missing, but it should be capturing way more of those people than what industry you're working in. Like if you're in academia, you're never going to show up as cybersecurity, right?
Okay, that makes sense. No.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. That was great.
Thank you, everybody.